This is part 3 of the series on using the Microsoft Graph and a Delta query from Microsoft Flow. If you are starting here, I suggest you go back to part 1 and understand kind of what it is we're doing, and then go through part 2, and that will prep your flow for this third and final installment of the series on simply getting a flow to work against the Microsoft Graph using a Delta query. In this third part, we're going to enhance the flow and we're going to perform the Delta request. So in the previous one, in part 2, we created the initial request and then stored the Delta query. So that in this one, we're going to pick up that Delta query and process the Delta request, and then we'll deal with deleted objects as well. So here we go. Enhance the flow. And in order to do this, we're going to add a SharePoint list action that checks to see if we have a saved Delta link. And then we'll put in a condition to determine whether we run the initial flow we created yesterday or the new Delta flow that we're going to run today, or the Delta query that we're going to run today. In the previous exercise, we created this flow, the get users from groups Delta query flow. And the thing I wanted to call out is one of the things that's really not a best practice is the fact that we're storing the secret ID in the flow, because anybody who has edit access to this flow or can view the output of this flow in the flow interface would be able to get that secret. And once they have that secret, then they have access to the Microsoft Graph as if they were the flow with the consent that you provided when you consented to this application. So that's not a great way to go. So in a future video, I'll talk about how to deal with this. But for the time being, for the educational purposes that we're doing here, suffice to say that that's the one thing that I want to do differently. And I promise we'll come up with a video to prove that in the next couple of weeks. All right, so we have all of these variables that we've initialized. Then we get the auth token. We parse the auth token so that now we have the bearer token that we're going to pass to every additional request that we make of the graph. So this is a straight line flow right now, except for where we process the user. So what we need to do is add some conditional logic based on getting the Delta query link. And so we'll do that right now. In between the next link and the Delta link, we're going to add a get item action from SharePoint. Make sure you do a get item and not a get items. Okay? Since we know that this is the first item in the list, since we know the name and the fact that this first item is Delta link, we can easily get that item as a configuration item into our flow. Okay, so we're going to get the item, and then in our initialize variable here, we're going to pass in the value field from the get item. And now if it's blank, we're going to go one way, but if it's there, we're going to execute the Delta query instead. So right here, after the JSON parse for the access token, we're going to add another action. In this case, it's just a condition. And the condition that we're looking for is that the Delta link variable is empty. So in this case, we're going to branch on whether or not the Delta link variable that we got from SharePoint is empty. If it's not, then we're going to process the Delta link. If it is, then we're going to execute our initial query. And what you can do inside of Flow is simply grab our get members and then the parse JSON and then the variable sets into the yes side of the condition. Now on the no side, we're going to handle the delta link. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another HTTP request. It's a get, and the URI is going to come from the delta link variable. Because remember, the condition here is that the delta link is blank. So if we come down the no side, there's going to be a value in delta link. Then we do what we did before. Create an authorization header, bearer space, and then pass in the access token from before. At this point, we can take a few shortcuts. I'm going to add a new JSON parse action and then 3 variables. Okay, so everything's renamed, and I've set the variables for each of these to their appropriate variable. The shortcut that I mentioned is that although we can use the output here of the body of the get group delta, we don't need to rerun the HTTP request to get our parse JSON schema, because we did that yesterday. So I'm going to open out the users array, and we'll open out the apply to each, and inside here in the condition for whether or not the next link is empty, we have the schema we need. And the key here is that we need both the next link and the delta link. So I'm going to do a Control A, Control C, go all the way back up to our JSON parse, and paste that in. While we're here, and that's on the clipboard, let's go ahead and update the schema for the get group members as well. And you'll know you did this correctly. You'll know you did this correctly if you go in and set your variables now to the output, in this case, of group delta, and you have the next link and the delta link. So we're going to set this to the next link. We're going to set this one to the delta link. And then our users array, you should be familiar with this now, because it's going to be the same as we did before. The only difference is that it references the expression, that is, references the JSON parse group delta. So that's this JSON parse. Once you have all of that done, and it saves successfully, copy the schema from the group delta and paste it in over here for group members. Essentially, they are returning the same content. It's just that one's the initial query, the other's the group query or the Delta query. That means that we can then come in here where we put in Ruby's name before, and we can fix that and pass that to our JSON parse group members Delta link. So now all of these variables should be populated correctly. Okay. And we should be good to go. So I'm going to choose save. And when we compare the two sides of the condition, they should look remarkably the same. In fact, they are virtually the same because the only difference is this HTTP request. And that's where I was saying if we wanted to, we could do some optimization of our flow here and send the results to a single JSON parse and then run the arrays. But for teaching you how to do this, I figured this was an easier way. All right. So we're all set to test our flow. We'll save it one more time just to be sure. And then remember yesterday we ran and we populated the flow groups configuration with the value of the Delta link, and we populated the flow groups video with users. Go ahead and clear those out now so that we can start with a fresh run. I'm going to go back to my flow and we'll hit test. So I'm going to perform the action. We'll click Run Flow, and we'll click Done. And so now what we should see is the flow run to completion. And when it does, it's going to go down the initialization side. So here it comes down and it does the initial members query. The other side, because we only ran it one time, is going to be not run. Okay, it didn't get passed down there. We come down, we do until, we've got our users, and then we saved our Delta link, which means that in the flow groups, I should have a Delta link in my configuration, and in the video, I should have a few users, and I do. That's great. So let's run it again, but first, well, we could do it either way. First, let's go ahead and run it again without making any changes to the group. Now, we didn't make any changes to the group, so the flow should run fairly quickly, and it should run down the no side because it found the Delta link here. Therefore, we run the Delta query. We come down here. There are no users, so if I open out apply to each, you'll see that there are no users in the array, and we get a new Delta link. So that's working. So now let's make a change. I'm going to go back into Azure Active Directory, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 active users. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 users in my flow group video. So let's go ahead and add, notice all these guys start with A. Let's add a few B's to the mix. So there's Betsy, there's Bianca, and I think that'll do. So we'll add 2 new users to our group. Now in my testing, I've found it takes about, 20, 30 seconds before the flow group change will work. But let's go ahead and test anyway. So flow is running. You'll notice it came down and it found that we're running a Delta query, so it's coming down this side. It ran through the users array, and it got our Delta link. So how many users should we have in our users array? We should have 2, because that's all that we added. If I go back to my flow groups video, I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 users. And as I expect, I have my video or my link for my Delta. So everything's working correctly. So what about handling deleted users? Well, if I want to handle deleted users, then I would look at the condition users not removed, And the deleted users, the activity for the deleted users is going to go on this no side. So let me take a minute and sort of fast forward you through and show you how we can use this flow pattern to manage our users in a slightly different way. Okay, that was a whole lot of editing, but let me show you what I did. Essentially, once I have the group user ID, then I can call the Active Directory get user by ID, and I can pass in the ID of the current user member in that group. And then I just create a new item. So this is the initial query flow. Now, what about when the user is deleted? Well, we're going to come in and update the record, which means that I do this time have to call it get items update record. And I'm using an OData query here just to get the item, which is the ID of the item, to make sure that I pass in the unique ID of that user. Once I've done that, this brings back an array of results, even though I told it to only bring back one. So we do an apply to each, and then inside the apply to each, which is only one item, we're going to update the record and we're going to mark them as deleted. Okay, so we should see this change in state with new users getting added. We could go into way more detail and do updated users and all kinds of stuff, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how this works, and then let me show you how it runs. So here we go. I'm going to clear out my flow groups video list, which has our delta link value in it. And then in the flow groups video, I added a couple of columns. I added full name, active, UPN, status, and details so that we can keep track of what's going on. All right, so the first time we run the flow, it's going to run down the initialization side. Should run down the initialization side of the flow, which it did. And as it processes the users, we should start to see them show up in here with their full name and then their active status, etc. And they do. So here they are as active, and these guys are original members, and we've got their email addresses, and we've got their unique IDs in the title field. And you may have noticed in the flow that we're going to use that unique identity field to keep track of our users. So let me go ahead and let me add some C's to the list. We'll add 3 new C's to the list. And then I'm going to delete, let's select those, And then I'm going to delete the B's. So I'm going to delete Betsy 1. And then let's delete Bianca 2. Okay, so we've got our C's added, we've got our B's removed. So we added 3 and we removed 2. So here's Bianca and Betsy. We should see them go away or get marked as deleted anyway. And we should see our new users get added. So we'll edit the flow, go to test, rerun the test, cross our fingers. The flow ran successfully. It ran down the delta side, and then it went through our users in array and saved our delta link. So like before, we should see we still have a delta link here. And in our flow groups video, we see that Betsy and Bianca both got deleted. So lots going on here, but actually kind of a cool business use for managing changes to groups. I want to thank you so much for hanging with me this long. This has been an epic amount of work, but look forward to showing you how to take care of that little security issue that I talked about so you don't have to store your secret in plain text. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and please click that subscribe button if you like these videos and want to see more. That's what keeps me going. So thanks so much.